All right, everyone, I want to thank you so much for being patient with us. There are quite a few people checking out the movie. There were over 2,000 folks watching the movie tonight. And again, I want to thank you very much. Just a little bit time consuming when folks are trying to adjust from moving one platform to another, and it can get quite confusing. So I really do appreciate your patience. And I'm very glad that you're able to meet with us here on the Zoom panel. Let me go ahead and introduce all the wonderful folks that we have here tonight joining us. So we are joined tonight by Casey Camp-Hornak, who you saw in the film. She is a hereditary drum keeper of the Women's Scout Dance, and she's of the Women's Scout Dance Society of Ponca Nation in Oklahoma. And of course, we have Brian Badas, who is another film protagonist. He is now working regionally along the Gulf South for Sierra Club, and also part of Another Gulf is Possible, which he'll tell us about in just a few minutes. Again, and then we are joined for the panel, Lenore Cruel. And Lenore, I know Lenore from way back. I can't remember, am I pronouncing the last name?
We always just referred to each other by first name, so yeah. I don't think you knew my last name. It's Curall.
Curall, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to see you on the panel. I'm glad you could join us. So Lenore is a citizen of the United Homa Nation, and that is in Southeast Louisiana. She's a lifelong resident of Lafourche Parish, and she continues to live within the tribal community. She is now the director and administrator of the tribe, which has been in this position for the last 8 years. And of course, we are joined also by Rachel Cletus. She is the director with the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and she leads the program efforts in designing effective and equitable policies to address climate change. Let me get back here. I can see all of you. One second. All right. And I want to thank all of you again for joining us here for the Q&A. I'm going to turn it over to Casey. She's going to start by opening with a prayer to get us started, and then we will start the Q&A. And Casey? Okay, were you ready to open us with just a quick prayer, a small prayer to start us off with the Q&A?
Yeah. Wakanda khube, manjan khube, wibdaha wibdaha ni manja indadi. Dachte huhu machpia bedede Wakanda, Great Spirit, Manjan Khube, Mother Earth, Sacred One. Say thank you today to our Father, the Sun, our grandmother, the Moon, our Mother, the Earth, and all of those things that make these ways possible for us to gather in this cyberspace. I saw names and places all around you, my Mother Earth, the one true mother that we all share. And we ask at this time to the west, to the north, to the east, to the south, above and below, that we're gathered together in one circle of love and understanding that will carry us through this time and into the next moment with understanding, with compassion, with guidance, with purpose, with intention, and make a way forward for the 7 generations to come, to have the blessings that we have had and our grandparents, our ancestors have made for us air to breathe, sacred water, that you yourself are cared for and that your generations are healthy. Sacred plants with your roots deep into the Mother Earth, that things are good for you and your generations to come. Forelegs, fins, wings, star nation, creepy crawlers, all things, these sacred rocks, all things that great mystery has set in place in a sacred manner that humans call nature. We ask your permission and your guidance to open our minds and spirits to the oneness that we all share. And we give great, 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 great thanks that we're here together. We ask a blessing on those sick ones in this time of a pandemic and on the caretakers, the ones who are risking their lives on the front lines, and all of those that we may not even have in our minds and our hearts, but certainly our spirits are connected. Again, thank you for this time together. Empower us, help us, humble us, and keep us one. Wiblaha, Sha. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, for starting us off so beautifully. Now, as far as the Q&A, I do want to say, if you do have a question for the panelists, please put it into the chat, and I will address as many questions as we can as we go along. One of the great things about the screening and how this particular panel has come together is the combination between scientists and Indigenous folks. It's one of the things that sometimes have just a problem existing together. One of the things that comes to mind, my first question, of course, tonight is for Brian and Lenore, because this coming to mind is going to open the subject as far as this goes. Now, Lenore, when you worked with Brian, on a research project for UTMB right after the BP oil disaster. And it was focused on the health of the seafood, specifically testing for oil-related contaminants in the seafood and the food that people eat, to determine, and if there were contaminants, it would determine an acceptable level of toxins for folks to consume. Now, the only purpose of that study was to test the contaminants in the food, in the seafood. And in this case, there wasn't much contamination found in the seafood in this particular study that UTMB did, but that didn't mean that harm didn't happen. And so one of the things from an Indigenous perspective, the study, didn't address the big picture of being destructive, not only to the immediate food supply, but also to the entire culture of the Gulf South, Indigenous people's ways of life, including psychologically and spiritually. And we'll start with Lenore first. How would you say that scientists should also take into consideration in these studies the cultural and spiritual aspects of their studies when they are coming to do this kind of work in the Gulf South?
So I would say that particular project, first I want to say it was probably one of the most frustrating projects I've worked on. Not for you, Brian. He's probably thinking it was him, but you're off the hook. It brought to light so many challenges, and just awareness of how little information we really had. In the process of trying to determine seafood safety even, we quickly found out there was never a baseline of any testing to be able to identify what can we compare it with. So that within itself, it made it very difficult to determine what do we call safe. You know, one of the things we recognized is because seafood is such an essential part of the diet for our people. We live on the coast of Southeast Louisiana, and our people are fishermen. And so, you know, for myself, growing up in a fishing community, and my family living and working as fishermen, I ate seafood 4, 5, 6 times a week easily. Whereas the average American, you know, will eat shrimp. Let's say, for instance, you know, they're lucky if they're eating shrimp once a week. It's kind of a standing joke in our household. When my brother got married, his wife loved shrimp, and he's like, I ate so much shrimp when I was a kid, I never want to eat it again, you know, because it was just that plentiful for us. But the challenge we found is there was no baseline information to compare. And so then we had to start looking at risk factors, and like, where does someone's risk fall in? And that becomes real subjective, and was really very challenging. The hard part is that, and this was probably the first time we were really enmeshed with a community-based participatory research process. And huge learning for us, and huge learning, I think, for the folks that we worked with, was what does that mean, and how do we work together? It was huge lessons for us of, like, you know, finding our voice and that process to say, no, 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 we're not comfortable with this, and this is how we need to do things. But it was definitely challenging for a lot of our people. Just, I would tell you, in the wake of the oil spill, many of our people, you know, we have a real complex relationship with the oil and gas industry in our community. Is you first have to understand that drilling first took place in Louisiana in 1901.
Wow.
And so it's been here a long time. And it's well embedded in the community. It's a primary employer, and a lot of our people, that's how they make a living. And so the challenge becomes, as we're having these conversations, our people really kind of move back and forth from fisheries to oil and gas industry for employment. And it was the first time both of those industries tanked at the same time. And so a lot of times the men in our tribe would, if the seafood industry was doing well, they would fish. If it was tanking, they would go and work oil and gas. And so there was always kind of a fallback plan that you could go to. And it was both of them were going down quickly. And so, you know, for our people that are very strong and have a strong sense of work ethic, it was the first time for me to see men that I had grown up seeing and always viewed as these very strong people be very unsure of themselves, and struggling with, what do I do? And so, you know, my grandfather was a fisherman, and he worked sun up to sundown. That's hard work. And then all of a sudden you see these people that are doing and living this lifestyle, and they can't do anything. And so it's feeling helpless. And that was, I would say, for me, probably one of the most difficult things to see happen in our community, because we're still the very proud people, very self-reliant, independent, and being able to take care of ourselves. And to have, just with one instance, that change for so many people was really heartbreaking.
Right. And so when you were doing this study, you know, from the scientific view, they were just testing seafood. I guess what I'll do is, what are some of, like, I guess that's the thing, and I'll now I'm going to ask, you know, Brian or Rachel to address some of the things that maybe from a scientific or cultural view, what are some of the things that need to be tested? Because a lot of times when things aren't tested, I don't want to say it means they're not important, but scientists, if there's not a study, then it's, you know, not something that they can actually research or officially say that they've, been able to address. Brian or Rachel, you wanna address that?
Yeah, do you mind if I respond to that, Rachel? I think a lot of this is coming from situations that I have been really, really interested in working on, particularly when I was with Tejas in the early 2000s. And we used to do these meetings called environmental justice encuentros, because we recognized that there was a communication problem between academia, science, research, and community. And all of them are speaking very different languages. All of them, have very different reasons for being curious or wanting to understand the world around them. And, because of that, there was years and years of just mistrust. I would say that science has some real historical problems, particularly with Indigenous and Black communities, where we have been experimented on. And these are not things that have disappeared either, right? We just saw what has happened to the migrant women in the detention centers, so I think there are very, very real things that are important. With this particular study, what I remember, even before this project took place, as I was, meeting Homa, I heard stories of how their land was taken from them, just like we saw in the film, right, through deceit, and oftentimes with very little compensation, if any at all. We saw the devastation of their, estuaries and water and seafood, even prior to the Deepwater Horizon spill. These pipelines and infrastructure and drilling projects have leaked and spilled time and time again. So, I think that because of the vastness of this one, there were and was a lot more attention paid to it. But the people along the coast and the Homa in particular, I know have been devastated for decades. And I remember meeting folks, elders, telling me stories that they weren't allowed to go to school, right? And they weren't allowed to speak their language. All of these things started to resonate with me because I remember stories from my mom also telling me, how they were not permitted to speak their own languages. And then I began to realize it's like, well, Spanish was also like a colonial language that was imposed on us too. And, I just realized like, this goes back a long way. This goes back a long way. So what science does not do, and what often academia does not do, and policy does not look at those long historical threads that have got us to where we are, right? So that baseline that Lenore's talking about is really important when you're studying anything. How are things at the beginning, right? Before these new contaminants were introduced, when these new lifeways were introduced, when these new ways of relating to the land were introduced. That has to be recognized at the very beginning. And those were the conversations that, we were trying to have. And the only method or process that research had for us was through this community-based participatory process that I had learned through my work with Tejas. So, it's certainly not, it has flaws, but it does have some beautiful things about it too. And I think, it's encouraging to see more conversations like this one happening tonight, because there are some real issues that, were highlighted in the film, that we've all experienced personally, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, maybe I would just add briefly, as Brian is pointing out, the practice of science is very much embedded in all of the racial, socioeconomic discrimination and biases and history that our society brings to these endeavors. Science itself, facts belong to everybody. And they come from the lived experience of people. They come from generational knowledge that's handed down. They can come from labs and measuring things. These are all different ways of understanding the world, understanding data, understanding facts. But the practice of science is a human endeavor, and it has come with all of the tragic and deeply inhumane histories that have been practiced around the world. And as Brian noted, this is not about some distant past. This is about here and now. So just one very quick example is when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, community groups all around the country were saying, we know who's going to be hit worst. We know who's going to be most exposed. And they will be African American communities and Native communities and Latino communities and the essential workers, the low wage workers, the people who have to go to work to put food on the table. And the data didn't catch up till August when the CDC officially released numbers that made it indisputable that there were higher hospitalization rates, higher death rates, several times higher, 3-4 times higher than the general population in some of these communities. But this is where you realize that there was some knowledge that was already in communities that they knew this would come in this way. And it's time for our policies to catch up with these realities. So at UCS, we've always felt science-based policies are what can help us move to this better world. But we too come from a background of a white conservation movement, a white environmental movement, and have some work to do ourselves in how we recognize the importance of working with community partners like Brian, like Lenore, like Casey, so that we can work together in alignment rather than a top-down manner that can create, really undermine the work that people are doing on the front lines. So we at UCS are trying very hard to be better partners, but we've got a way to go.
And this is, you know, I do want to thank UCS for hosting this event. Now, there are a lot of questions coming in right now, specifically related to science and some of those questions around that. But I do want to make sure that everyone gets a chance so if, to answer the questions. So Casey, do you have any thoughts on the cultural shift, a cultural shift happening or in from the scientific studies maybe that you have encountered or from scientists that have come to do studies in the Ponca area? Like, if you've had that experience.
Yeah, put it simply, yes, we have. We have been the subject of scientific experiments for a long time, from the first smallpox blankets that were brought to us along the Missouri River until present day. And yes, that has happened. I think, I do appreciate being here tonight. I appreciate listening to everyone's wisdom. But I also need to really say clearly that the scientists that live among the indigenous people are often called shaman, medicine people, interpreters, spiritual leaders. And those particular relatives can understand the language of a plant, can hear the medicine of the river, can understand what the Thunder Nation is saying have had first-person experience with Star Nation beings can cross through the veil and understand the spiritual side, can hear the pain of the Mother Earth when her bowels are being exposed. My brother Leonard Crow Dog, our Sundance chief, recently, I was listening to him speak. He said, no matter how many cesareans our Mother Earth has experienced, she's still willing to give life. I never thought of it that way. But those are scientists in the deepest, most clear way of understanding what's going on within what other people call the natural world. And so it doesn't take a scientist, although I appreciate their learning. I appreciate the studies that they've been through. It doesn't take a scientist to see that we as a human species are on the brink of destruction and ready to eliminate ourselves from the face of the earth because of our behavior. It doesn't take another study to see that the air, the earth, and the waters are poisoned because of this fossil fuel extraction and burning. It doesn't take a scientist to see when children are suffering from asthma when they're born. A mother looks at her child and sees if their skin is disrupted, if their breathing is shallow, if their eyes are the wrong color. Those are things that are natural to a human being. And if a human being is in its natural understanding of what should be and what has been altered as a result of the behavior of other human beings. So the meshing of these understandings has to be put on the equal level, equal acceptance, and equal ability to express ourselves. You know, one time sitting with panelists that all have these doctorates behind their names and have attended all these schools is when I came up with that idea of saying I was a graduate of MIT, which is matriarch in training. Because I do have that understanding. I've been taught from birth and probably before birth. Many things are in me because of blood and cellular memories. Many things that are happening in terms of scientific discoveries are things that we've always known. So appreciate this group of human beings who have studied hard to attain the level that they are right now. But I must always remind you, it's time for action. No more studies to see that we're going the wrong direction. No more studies to say that indigenous people, yeah, they've got some understandings that we need to listen to. No more studies of the animals that are dying and becoming extinct. No more studies of the sacred air and the sacred water and the sacred earth to see that humans are destructive. Do something. Do something. Take control. Make a difference. Recognize the rights of nature. Recognize that you are part of that and not separate from, and certainly not above. Oh, and I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. You got me going.
Well, I think that's it for the night.
No, I want to say that's one of the beautiful things that I really looked forward to in this particular conversation, because there are some surprising things that I have found just in general, because I came to I want to say, knowledge-wise, like Casey was saying, I just knew in my heart what was right. But I really came to the environmental movement a little later in life. And so for me, finding out when I got involved with Sierra Club at an earlier time, not now, Brian, people evolve, organizations evolve, let me just say that. But when I first started, I was really shocked when getting involved with the environmental work that there was a difference. People actually saw the environment outside of people. It was separate from the environment, including people. And that for me was a really hard thing to understand when I first got involved. And so I think for me, that being a surprise, because of, just from a different, I come from a different place and everybody does. So one of the questions, I know tonight we have a lot of people here from UCS, and there are people that, want to be part of the climate justice fight. And in being, there are several number of supporters within the UCS community that are scientists that want to help. How can scientists show up for climate action in a way that doesn't perpetuate further harm? Like, besides the studies, got that, Casey, and definitely got that, but maybe some other ways that they can show up without, not just doing studies, but other ways they can show up to further help with the climate action that we're calling for at this time. And let's see, Lenore, you want to go first since you're the last one to say, not to put you on the spot. Someone else may want to go, but I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets a chance to chat.
Yeah, I think, Brian and I both talked about community-based participatory work, and I won't call it studies and those kinds of things, but I think there's more that can be done by exploring there. The opportunity to sit down and have some insightful conversations with community and figuring out, because in a lot of cases, what we have found out is, and I can tell lots of stories of how the impacts and the people that affects my community, but that doesn't always move the needle. And so one of the things here in Louisiana, we're dealing with this $10 billion unfunded coastal protection restoration master plan. And it is driven by science. And it's modeling and those kinds of things. And it's a language we have to get more comfortable in speaking in order to do the advocacy work to move some of that needle. And so I think what we can do is how do we help each other understand some of those issues and have that collaborative sharing. So what's the terminology and what's the scientific knowledge we need to learn from a community perspective, and then as well as what can we share of that real true learning from the community perspective. Like we have conversations all the time that, every time they want to build a new levee in our community, it's like if they just ask some of the people that live in the community, they will tell you what happens. They don't need to be an engineer and have a nice title behind it. They know what the water does. They know how the water moves. And so they know and can anticipate those impacts, but that conversation doesn't happen. So I think there has to be a greater sharing there and a respect for each other that we have to come to.
Thank you. Brian, Rachel, Casey?
I'll go real quick. I think, like everyone right now, I think there's a need to address historical harms, to deal with white supremacy within the institution of science. And as Casey said, stop studying things that we already know the answer to, right? Like, I think there's a certain amount of knowledge that should then lead to action. And I find it still difficult to understand why scientists are fearful, right? They're fearful of putting themselves in an advocacy position when they know if things are not done, you know, we're talking about the complete devastation of you know, entire ecosystems of life itself. That's such a problem, right? And it needs to be addressed. They also need to recognize that indigenous peoples have knowledge that you know, doesn't need to be checked, verified, confirmed, analyzed. You know, just take them at their heart. You know, just because you have a degree or you have gone through study doesn't mean that you have all the right answers. And even scientists will tell you, like, the way you learn is by making mistakes, right? So I think what Lenore said, what Casey has said, you know, is that there is knowledge because people have a different relationship to the land. They're studying it, right? They're just not publishing it in journals. It's here, and it's, you know, part of their entire body, and their family and their home, you know, everything. And so there's a different entire relationship, but you'll hear words that are used to dismiss and discount indigenous knowledge, like that's anecdotal, or, you know, scientific terms that minimize a level of certainty, and, you know, are not, did not allow them to, like, make stances on different things. So those are just a few. I think you know, I'd be interested in hearing what Rachel has to say too. But I think listening is definitely the first step.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Brian. I think at its core, there needs to be a reckoning with the power differential that has been created, where the very communities that have been safeguarding nature and have lived in balance are the communities that are facing that are the forefront of facing things like the climate crisis, and it isn't enough to just point that out as a data point. It really is a question of, are people who have power now going to step back and create the space for power to flow in the direction that it needs to create the solutions that we all need. Um, I would just say that the other thing about the practice of science, that as we face the climate crisis, we're all recognizing that working in silos, being highly specialized in individual things, is actually keeping us in a box that is not allowing us to create holistic solutions, and that we're constantly in a reactive mode to the next disaster and the next disaster, instead of recognizing the big picture here. And then, you know, for example, I do a lot of work in the space of clean energy and renewable energy deployment. And one of the things that my colleagues and I have been thinking about a lot lately is to really grapple with this climate crisis. We're not just talking about techno solutions. We really are talking about deep socioeconomic shifts. We really need systems changes, not just you know, swapping out a coal-fired power plant for some wind and solar. And it's that systemic change piece that we're not having enough of a conversation about, because frankly, it's a little inconvenient. It threatens people in power. And we know that incrementalism isn't going to get us anywhere. And we are stuck in a political stalemate that only creates space for incremental solutions. So this outside power building, to actually change the box in which we're operating, not just try to do the best we can in the limited box, that's where I think showing up as allies, showing up in a listening mode and a learning mode is really, really important for groups like mine, like the Union of Concerned Scientists and others who are trying to do better, but are still you know, still need to be listening and learning. There's a lot of work to do here. So I really appreciate, for example, Lenore. Uh, you invited us to come visit with you in a way that was so open. We came with maps, with sea level rise projections, and you met us with the knowledge that you had. You took us to see the bayous where the trees had died, where within the lifetimes of a chief, trees had turned to skeleton. And it was so, you can look at those maps on a computer your whole life and you'll never get that visceral sense of what climate change and saltwater intrusion and sea level rise really means till you're there. So I would highly encourage scientists to get out in the field, meet with people, and really let it influence the way you're thinking about the world. Be curious and really genuinely curious. That is also the spirit of science.
All right, thank you. Now, we are getting quite a few questions. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. Click the Q&A button and I will take in as many questions as I can. I will say a lot of questions are not specifically related to the film, and we will try to answer those maybe outside of this conversation or, you know, afterwards. So just be patient, and we are getting to some of these questions. Now, one of the questions, I think this is going to be specifically for Lenore to begin with. Someone has asked if you can give an update on what's happening right now in the United Homa Nation. They had visited in 2018 and heard and witnessed the pollution there, land loss, coastal erosion and displacement. And I had mentioned earlier that you were losing a football field a day from, you know, the coast of Louisiana, but they were asking about that and any, you know, health or subsequent economic impacts from the refineries. If you could answer that.
Yeah, so I would love to say that we've turned the corner on that. We have not. We still are losing land. There are a number of projects that are going on. They're very small. And you know, the large problem we have, and I don't want to get too political. However, I don't know how to address it without it, is we are a state recognized tribe. And so without federal recognition status, there are a lot of doors that are not open to us. So a lot of the federal protections and the federal laws that would apply, that would allow and require our tribe to be consulted and to have input into particular processes, we are not able to do. And so it is a huge challenge. So I'll give a prime example. One of the things we, post oil spill, we had, our chief at the time had a meeting with, it was the czar that had come in and was distributing the funds and those kinds of things. And he said, you guys get me a proposal of what your needs are for the community. I need it in 2 days, get it to us. And we'll review it and see what we can do. And 3 months later, we still don't get a response. We worked like crazy to put a proposal together in 2 days and get that turned in. And after several months and trying to push and say, okay, where is the, you know, what's happening with this proposal? Our community is hurting. We have needs that need to be addressed. We received a letter that said, although we appreciate our relationship with the United Homa Nation, the Oil Spill Pollution Act doesn't apply to state recognized tribes, and therefore you are not eligible to receive assistance. You know, and so then it makes it very hard to try to advocate for your needs and those kinds of things. So that's a huge barrier we face. It's an issue our tribal council works on a continuous basis to work and address. Now, outside of that, it doesn't mean we don't do anything. However, that is a big barrier. There are some different things we do and have made some pushes. And I will say one of the things and I will take my United Homa Nation hat off for a minute officially. And this is Lenore Curall, tribal citizen. I will say, you know, the oil and gas industry in this area has been a huge employer, but we have not seen post oil spill a big return of the industry. There's been some discussions and some concerns, and lots of folks have like, they just keep waiting for it to bounce back and waiting for it to bounce back. That needle just is not moving. I think to the extent of what the community may hope for it to happen. And the problem here in Louisiana is the state has really put all their eggs in that basket, and there is not another primary industry here. And so my concern lies, and what we continue to advocate for is we cannot forget the transition of the workforce in this process. So one of the things we are pushing extraordinarily heavy with the state at this point is as they're having conversations is, and Louisiana is actually beginning to have conversations about renewable energy. And I think it makes a lot of folks very nervous here because they don't know what that looks like and that kind of stuff. But it's like, we've got to take the workforce with us. And you know, and that's, I think, the downfalls we've had in other places is we get excited, hey, we've shut down that coal plant, but what happens to the people that were dependent on it to feed their families? And I'm not saying don't shut those things down, but we can't forget the people that are so dependent on it for their livelihood. And so it's sticky and it's messy. And we have to deal with it as a holistic problem, as a whole. Now, I myself would say, I think we need to depoliticize some of the language. And so, you know, anything that carries the word green, you know, is instantly, oh, wow, that's a liberal program. And those kinds of things. And so I think we have to really work on depoliticizing that language and dealing with, you know, what does that really mean? Because then it becomes tools instead of the intended uses. And so I think that's an area we have to seriously work on as a community, to de-weaponize that terminology, because it almost becomes like, you know, 4-letter words.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Casey, this next question is for you. There was a question regarding the rights of Mother Earth and the movement rights that you are working on with the group of women that you started at the international level. Could you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in regards to movement rights?
Yeah, it's wonderful listening to everyone. And it's wonderful reading all of the information and offerings that people are making in this chat as well. I'm learning a great deal, and I appreciate everyone's thoughts and intentions. Really want to let you know that I appreciate you deeply. Lenore, in one sense, one might want to look in terms of just transitions. And I think that may be what you're talking about, because much of the workforce of the pipelines think that we're against them, when we fully understand that they have families at home and children they're taking care of and elders and just trying to make a living, fully understand that. And what we do need to help them understand is it's about the fact that they should have a safe place to be as well. Working in the extractive industry and fossil fuel industry is the second most dangerous job in the world. I don't know what the first most dangerous job is. I think maybe it's, you know, when they catch you and you've been hiring them to do this dangerous stuff. I don't know. But it is something we need to help them understand, is that we believe that those corporations that are the top 1% who are making those decisions owe them a just transition into a safe workspace that might be in renewable energies. I don't know where it might be, but they certainly need to be cared for in a good way. You know, we were talking about many of the things that you all were mentioning about organizing from the ground up in order to make a difference in your own communities. And I feel as if that's where my work has always been. I live among my folks here in north central Oklahoma. And when I was on our tribal council, right now I serve as the environmental ambassador. One of the things that we did was, because we are federally recognized tribes, and believe me, Lenore, it doesn't make that much difference. They still run over you and do what they want to do. That consultation nonsense is really just so they can check a box on one of their pieces of paper, and we tell them no, and that means consultation to them, you know. So it's not that easy. I am kind of lobbying, by the way, while all of you are doing this, to try to get Deborah Holland from New Mexico as the next Secretary of Interior, because I know that she would do a good job there. So any of you who have that political bent to put that out there, continue to put it out there. I'm putting it out to the prayer warriors to help her find her way in there. But we all believe, and in the way that I was taught was to do our organizing at home first, begin with oneself. If within oneself one understands that there is an obligation and an honor to caretaking your own personal self, your body, that is the greatest gift Wakanda gave you, the greatest gift Earth Mother gave you. You do that in many ways. And you do that by maybe growing your own food if you can, even if it's that one plant out on your patio, you know, or in your home, you're growing your herbs for your cooking, whatever it is that you can do in that manner. Then the next thing is your kitchen table organizing. It's something that's more difficult with the COVID out there, but that gives us the opportunity to be at your kitchen table like we are right now, in your living rooms, through your computers, in these Zoom meetings, to start to organize our thoughts for how are we going to be part of this system change? What are we requiring for the system change? One of the things Penny Opal Plant with Movement Rights said to me one time was that she prays regularly for the oil and gas itself, because it is a sacred portion of Mother Earth that belongs inside her. And it hadn't occurred to me. And I don't know how I missed that. But of course it's true that when things are disrupted within the body of Earth, they also disrupt within the body of human, because we are all connected. One of the things that I've learned as well is that we are not here like protecting nature. We are nature protecting itself. And it's important to internalize that concept. You and I, we breathe, we eat, we drink. So we have inhaled, put down within ourselves, our cellular structure is now what they call nature. We are that. And so we are in the process of learning how to protect ourselves. So rights of nature is something that the Ponca people have also embraced. We put a moratorium on fracking and injection wells because our neighbors around us, the farmers, the ranchers, the citizens of the municipalities weren't allowed to by law. But within our sovereign boundaries, we did that. We also enacted the rights of nature as a statute, saying that if the extractive industry is harming other portions, like dumping their waste into the sacred water and killing the fish and the deer and us, then we will sue on behalf of that water. That's happened in New Zealand with the Wanganui River. It's happened on Lake Erie with 250,000 citizens. It's happened in municipalities and tribal nations all around, and has become a big deal in Europe. Europe is looking at putting together a rights of nature thought, and it is just one more tool. It's not an answer, but it is one more tool for all of us to be able to say, we want new policies in the politic that are part of a strategy towards a way for our species to continue on Earth. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Brian, this is a question for you. There was a person said, observing how difficult it was for you to organize even a block in Texas, like you said. What did you think you learned from the experience of the film that would account for the difference? Or do you think that you'll be able, what do you think will overcome that resistance to developing the unity, a unity for action, united action?
I mean, I think what I've learned mostly is that, you know, the people that live around me in the Houston area are different people. First and foremost, and I think that, you know, we have been detached deliberately from the land, so it's often difficult to organize on those issues. You know, specifically, Houston is a big oil and gas town, just like Lenore was talking about, Louisiana, and that's a reality. But I think, you know, what I have found is that when we can connect people to their history and they are able to understand their own personal journey and their own story through their family experiences, and their culture and their heritage, you know, those are powerful things that remind them that, you know, there's more important things than the individual. And we're bombarded with, you know, the message of individuality day in and day out. And that's what I notice in the communities that are able to organize, you know, quickly, effectively, and with success, is that they operate as a unit, right? As people who are considering the collective, the community, and not just themselves, not just their own family, right? There's a big problem with selfish individual behavior and wanting to be right, you know, like back to the whole science problem, like having to be right, 100% right, you know, and that's the problem. I find people are more interested in just debating and arguing and fighting, and not really interested in a collective goal, right? So that's what takes deep work, is helping folks understand that, you know, we are all dependent on each other. We are all connected. We are the land, and the land is us, and that we need to protect it. You know, if we care about ourselves, you know, that's the real irony and the paradox. If we care about ourselves, then we have to care about everyone else, you know? And that reminds me of in Lakesh, right? You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to me. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. And these are just old, you know, very, I think, simple ways of being that can lead to better community, you know, based, driven solutions, and recognition of the problems, right? Of the problems is the first step. So,
I mean, maybe one thing I would just say, Brian, is this is not happening by accident because communities are under a lot of pressure. We have an economic system that has people constantly worried about their next paycheck, their health care, their how their kid's going to go to school, and it's a system that has people in a state of anxiety and trauma constantly, and that makes people sort of retreat to these spaces that you're calling you say the word selfish, and it is what happens is under that kind of repeated stress people sometimes retreat to these places, but we are being faced with such major crises now. And I think the thing about crises is they're very clarifying because the stakes are so high that everyone can see them. We're seeing them now with COVID, with the climate crisis, with pollution from fossil fuels. And, you know, just this is not about a community, but a community of scientists that we at UCS found that when under the last 4 years of an administration that has been so anti-science, has attacked everything, we had so many scientists who just came off the sidelines. There was none of that, oh, we can't be advocates. They understood that this is a moment where you can't be silent. You have to get off the sidelines. And I think this is what we're all trying to do and need to do in our communities is keep holding the big picture and not allow our opponents to divide us into these spaces where we're just looking down because we can't put food on the table, or we can't, you know, we're worried about our children's futures. And but that can only happen if a community, if there are other people holding your back, you know, in those spaces. So I think we just need to see each other, as Lenore is saying, you know, get over these words and terminologies that are dividing us and really see each other as human beings, trying to deal with what are some of the most pressing issues, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren.
The only thing I would add is just fear is just debilitating, you know, and it's probably the biggest issue we face is fear, and people use it as a weapon.
And we've seen a lot of that lately, especially with the administration that we have now. Now, I will say we do have a lot of questions regarding the new administration coming in. Biden-Harris coming in and how that might affect what's happening in your world dealing with this work. One of the things that I do want to say, I know there's a lot, and the reason that I'm wrapping this up is we take a lot of questions. We've been talking now for about an hour, so we're going to have to wrap things up. We can talk about this, especially in this group, a long time with a lot of different things, but there have been different things coming in. Some of them are kind of in the same vein, and they're asking, you know, what can we do? How can we help? And I think, you know, if you haven't gotten an answer from, you know, helping with some of the things that have been mentioned, feel free to contact the UCS or even the Condor or the Eagle and follow up. But one of the things that I want to address is, you know, we do have all of these questions. So one of the last questions is, how do you tell folks when they ask you things like, how do I join the front lines? And I'm going to say my own part, just because, you know, I have a little bit of in the film and I'm not really on the panel, but for me, I always say, you really have to start from home. You can't go into another community and expect things to change if the things are still the same in your own community that you know, may be more privileged or more just not as close. You're not, maybe not Indigenous, and you want to come help Indigenous folks. And for me, I always say you have to start at home. And in that vein, would you, well, how do you respond to folks that tell you, how can I help? What do I do? Even, you know, what were maybe some of the pressing priorities that you would say for someone that still doesn't know how they can help? And I'll let this pop up. Who wants to go first?
I'll go quick. All right, so first, make your donation, support the United Homa Nation. They are literally drowning and losing land that they lived on for thousands of years. support Casey's work, through movement rights, and be an advocate for rights of nature, and continue to, be present in movements in your neighborhood, right? Find those environmental justice issues that are present, that might not be as sexy or fun, but equally as important, and be, a true ally. Don't offer advice. Just ask, how can I help? And then do that, right? Whatever they say, make phone calls, watch my kids, print some flyers. It's really that simple, and begin to build community, think collectively, be joyful in your interactions with people, be patient, and, work towards a life that you would want your children and grandchildren to inherit. Yeah.
Thank you. Rachel, Casey, Lenore?
Well, I'll say very briefly, I think we really need to see the interconnectedness of all the work that's being done from the community to the national level. Thank you to everyone who voted, and who voted with a view to greater equity and justice, and science centered in our policy making. But I'm here to say that it's not done. You have to make democracy work, you have to show up every day. And this is only the beginning. We have to keep pressure on our policymakers to deliver the solutions that we all know need to happen. And they need to happen quickly. We're all aware of the timeframes in which we're operating here. We know what the problems are. The solutions are within reach. Let no one tell you that we don't know what to do. We know exactly what to do. What's been lacking is political will. What's the problem is that fossil fuel interests are very powerful and have deep pockets, and they hide behind workers and communities who depend on them for livelihoods. And that's not okay. And we have to break that nexus. We have to be in solidarity with people whose communities are being affected as we transition away from coal and fossil fuels. And we have to recognize that our solutions have to be intersectional. We're not going to solve climate in a corner here. Climate is connected to everything in our lives. It touches everything. It's connected. So care about healthcare, care about affordable housing, care about the rights of people. We're going to have many, many displaced people because climate change is making a lot of places very risky. Have a human rights centered approach, the rights of nature centered approach, as Casey has said, because all of these things are connected. And really, really appreciate so many of you being here tonight. That gives me a lot of hope for the future that we can bring, the future that's within our reach, and the future that young people they're not just asking, they're demanding from us. We can and must do better.
The thing for me, I think folks need to kind of have a stop and think through what commitment they're ready to make. This is not a sprint, it's definitely a marathon. And so you have to be prepared for that long haul. And so thinking through what can you do, not just for one moment in time, but over the whole race. And thinking, when it starts with small things of what can you do within your own home to help with reducing things. And so I think that's that soul searching of figuring out what can you do internally, and revisit that, because again, it's doing one small little action is great, but that's one moment in time, and this is with us a long time.
Thank you. And Casey?
Yeah, I think everyone had valid points that were powerful. I really appreciate everything that has been said, both by the panelists as well as those who are part of the conversation. And I think the most important thing for me, when I hear someone say, how do I get to the front lines? How do I help there? You are at the front lines wherever you are. Wherever you are, you're at the front lines of an environmental crisis. And as Rachel said, there is not one disconnect from what's going on with our Mother Earth, our Father Sky, that isn't affecting 100% of everything else. So if you're breathing, you're on the front line of caring whether that air is polluted. If you're eating, if you're drinking, wonder where is that water coming from? We're all downstream from that. What can you do on the front line? You can be creative. What is your gift? Your gift is science. Then how do you convince the people around you to participate in making sure that everything is safe and good in your neighborhood? Go out in the street in front of your house or your apartment. Become the front line. Invite the other warriors to participate with you. You don't have to wait for somebody else. You're the one that should be doing this. If you were not that one, you wouldn't be here tonight. You wouldn't be asking that question. You know that. You know that. Take your power. Creator, great mystery, gave equal power to every spirit that is here tonight and everyone that is an elected official. They're no more powerful than you are. Those guys in the offices that are raking in the billions of fake plastic nonsense, they're no more powerful than you are. You got it. Be it. Be that frontline warrior. Take charge. Enjoy yourself. You got a right to. Be joyful in your winning, because things are turning around. Fossil fuel, it's on its way out right now. Remember when COVID hit and we all sat at home for 2 weeks? Remember that the quality of the air, water, and earth immediately began to heal. Frontline warrior, go for it.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of the attendees tonight that have stuck with us to the Q&A and enjoyed watching the film. I hope you really enjoyed that. Tell a friend. We have 2 more screenings coming up. There are ways to donate if you still haven't had a chance to do that. And I want to thank the panelists for your time tonight and give you the opportunity to if there are any last words, any last comments that you would like to say before we close for the evening, please feel free to do that now. And if not, there is one question that I thought that might help folks. I think, Casey, you might have answered this already, but one of the questions that I thought was really interesting, especially in the COVID and the times, political times, one of the questions was, what are some of the ways, given that the fights that you're enduring, how do you manage your feelings of anger or resentment in order to continue the work? And then I'm going to close that out. So if you want to answer that question or have any other last thoughts, I'd love to hear your answer to that. And we'll start with Lenore. Okay, start with Lenore. Lenore, I'm just like you. I keep picking on you first. You don't have to go first. I can pick on Brian.
You could pick on Brian. I thought you were going to Casey, so I'm sorry. I didn't get my thoughts together.
That's okay. I'm going to pick on Brian. Let's pick on Brian. So Brian.
That's funny. I was actually trying to type in an answer before we shut down. I was like, wait.
I know there's so many questions. There were so many folks that were listening tonight. So I apologize that we didn't get to all of the questions, but yeah. I believe there's a way to do that afterwards. So we'll probably doing that.
I'll try. I've been copying and putting the comments and the questions on a Word doc. But
oh, great.
You know, this is I hear this word often, you know, used in the South, particularly, you know, for hurricane ravaged communities. You know, people say, "Oh, you're so resilient. How do you do it? How do you do it?" You know, I think at the end of the day, I am just happy to be alive. I really am. And I am very happy to have the family that I have. And though things are difficult and sad even, you know, oppressive even, it's life is a struggle. Life has always been a struggle, and it always will be a struggle. Um, and that's something that, you know, was taught to me at a very young age. So it gives me a mandate. It gives me work to do, right? So I continue on because I feel indebted to my ancestors who brought me here, and knowing the struggles that they went through fills me with pride and joy and strength and courage. And thinking of, you know, the people that come after me. I don't have any kids, but that does not mean that, you know, all of Earth's children are not our children, and that we're not indebted to them. So I try to find joy in everything that I do, and, you know, as Casey said in the films, like you have to laugh, and sometimes those really difficult times and injustices. There's humor in absurdity. There's humor in, you know, just ridiculousness, as we all have learned the last 4 years. But people do get hurt. People have died, and so, you know, once you recognize that, it's like, all right, back to work, and you carry on. So that's how I do it, and you know, I wouldn't say that that's the path for everyone, but that's kind of my medicine.
Thank you.
So Liana, first and foremost, I want to say thank you guys so much for having us here and honoring the United Homa Nation in this way. It's overwhelming. I would say that for that acknowledgement and recognizing the challenges our community goes through. You know, it's really touching, and so thank you so much. For me personally, I would say no matter how frustrating sometimes the work can be, and you know, there are definitely days when you just want to just go, oh my God, can I just go back to bed? I always feel very honored that I get to work for my people every day, the people that I love, that I feel such a strong sense of service to, and you know, and that I can do that every day, and that can be my livelihood, and how honored I am to be able to do that, and that I have this opportunity to do that. You know, and not everyone has that opportunity, so I take that responsibility. I try to very seriously, and do the best I can, but it's really humbling to be in this position of service. And so, you know, like Brian, I'm not married, I don't have children. Some people have accused me of being married to the tribe, and that's okay. But it fulfills me in a way, you know, that is really difficult to explain, you know. And so in the most frustrating things, you know, you'll just remember that one person that you helped in some small way, and it just, you know, makes it all worthwhile.
Great, thank you. Casey and then Rachel, there was a question specifically about UCS that I'd like to ask you, along with just the last comment, the closing comments. And And then Casey, the question was, yeah, okay.
Okay, good enough. First of all, I try not to take anything personally. So I also enjoy anger. It fuels me. I really love to get rowdy when we get in the streets and get the shout out and the movement happening and the universe rippling, and I enjoy that energy. I really do. I don't give it a persona. I don't let it internalize, because it's kind of like if you get road rage, you're the only person in the car dealing with it. The other guy is still driving by, right? So it can't really be that you allow anger to live within you or to feed a fire that is unhealthy, but you utilize the energy that it creates in making the world a better place to be for those that you love and that you care for. That's what works for me. One of the strong things that I remember John Trudell said when we were young about the colonization of our people here in the United States and what we call Turtle Island. He was talking about how they were wanting us to be good Indians. And of course, we're not even Indians, right? But at any rate, trying to get us to be the good pat us on the head, Here, we're putting you on a reservation, you get commodities, be happy kind of stuff. He said, my anger is not benign. And mine is not benign. Mine is a fire, and I honor the fire, Mine is a tidal wave, and it crashes on the shore and cleanses. And we're in a time of purification. So if we feel anger because things are not the manner in which they're supposed to be, use it in a happy, strong way. Put it out there with love and compassion and power, because it can be utilized in a good, healthy way. But feel it, enjoy it, empower yourself with it, and then move it into a good manner. Yeah, it's what works for me anyway. Love you all. I'm grateful to be among you. And I'll see you at the next showing of when the condor and the eagle join the power and fly.
Thank you. And Rachel, as a scientist, how do you, I'll leave the Lucia's question for later. Just talk about how you work with this as a scientist, how you calm yourself.
You just put words to what I was just going to say very incoherently. I think that righteous anger is good, and it's part of the job. Don't turn it into an ulcer. Don't turn it into something that keeps you up late at night. But we should be angry. What we're seeing around us isn't the way the world should be, and we should never get complacent or normalize what we're seeing. But the thing that gives me courage is really the people. Just you people tonight that I'm on this panel. What a magical thing it is that somehow my work at UCS has brought me to this place that I'm here on this panel with you. It's a privilege, and I so appreciate the people who are called to this work. My colleagues at UCS, all of you. It's what keeps me going. Really, it's the people, and there's more of us than them. There's more of us, and we're more stubborn, and we're gonna win this fight. We just, as Lenore said, it's not gonna happen quickly. It's a marathon, but we're gonna win this, and there's a lot of joy and song and dance along the way as we win this.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you all. This has been a great panel. Thank you all for your time for tonight. Thank you, all the attendees, for your time as well. And we will see you again. If you want to see another screening, there are some coming up again this week on Thursday and Sunday. You can go to the Condor and the Eagle on Facebook, and you should be able to find those. Thank you so much, and I'm going to end the call. You have
Thank you,
a very
everyone.
good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Leona.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.